We play and call it work.
Hey everybody, Matthew and Steve here from MiniWarGaming.com, and welcome to another discussion video. I guess by now we've been calling this series Fixing Age of Sigmar because we know all the answers.
100%.
We are know-it-alls. We represent people in general who think that they can just talk about something and that magically makes things better.
And him.
But it's still fun anyways. I've once heard that philosophy is like angel food cake. No, sponge cake. That you can eat it and it tastes good, but it never fills you up. That's like this.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyways, so today we're going to talk about what killed Warhammer Fantasy. Why did it die? Now, this is a touchy subject for a lot of people because some people think that it shouldn't have died. But we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it in a nice way. I'm not here to bash the fact that, get on with your lives and move your models from square to circular bases because they look better that way anyways. We're not here to talk about...
I concede that fact.
Things
do look better round bases.
Yeah. We're not here to talk about that. You want to leave them on your square bases, you can stay back in the old days and keep them on your square bases. That's fine. I understand. Whatever. You don't like your models looking good? Whatever. It doesn't matter. We're not here to talk about that.
This is the problem. This is the problem. It's people.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I honestly... Warhammer Fantasy, I played a lot of Warhammer Fantasy in earlier editions. I stopped playing later on because I just fell out of love with the game. So I'm not here to talk about why the game wasn't good. We're here to try to talk about why the game in the end... No, sorry, if the game wasn't good.
Okay.
That's just what I meant. We're here to talk about why, in the end, Games Workshop decided to cancel it and start Age of Sigmar. And don't give me that Warhammer Fantasy is still here. It's not. It's gone, all right? Just admit it. Now,
Interesting fact.
It's now
It's actually kind of still here.
Why is that?
There's a group of about 20 guys in this area.
No. I'm not saying that there aren't players. I'm trying to say that Games Workshop really, this is Warhammer Fantasy 2.0 or something like that, or 9th edition.
Well, I mean, it kind of is. Same characters exist, same universe in a roundabout way.
Right. Okay, let's just get that out of the way. Obviously, Warhammer Fantasy is not been erased. It hasn't been retconned. It's been... What do you call that?
Well, it's been
rebooted in a sense, but
yeah.
Not like the Star Trek way where they go through a wormhole, go back in time, and then everybody looks different for some reason and acts different for some reason. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about they decided to move it forward thousands of years. They decided to destroy the old world and create the realms the way they are, which, like it or not, Warhammer Fantasy is still part of the past of Age of Sigmar. But just for the sake of argument, we're going to say Warhammer Fantasy is God. Age of Sigmar replaced it.
Yes.
Let's just concede that fact. We're not.
That is true.
You can disagree with that. In fact, I'd love to hear your comments on all of this. But this is going to bring up some anger issues in some people that are watching this video, and I get it. I get it. You spent years of your life and tons of your money and time building an army like Tomb Kings. And then they decide that army is no longer relevant at all. You don't get to even, you can play with the Tomb Kings in a new one, but let's face it, it's not relevant anymore. That is discouraging. It's kind of like the Primaris Marines replacing the Tactical Marines. We can talk about all you want, but in the end, they replace them. And that can be discouraging and kind of angering for somebody who spent a lot of their time and money on that hobby. I get it. So I understand why you'd be angry if you did that. But we're here to talk about, in the end, what made Warhammer Fantasy fail, lose sales, and eventually go so badly that a company would take its first ever game and one of its core games for such a long time and essentially destroy it and start, not from scratch, but almost.
That's funny assumption. We don't... Can you say with absolute certainty it was sales were so bad that...
Yeah.
Well,
because they're a public company, you can see their numbers.
But I
Warhammer
mean,
Fantasy sales were bad.
This is still Warhammer Fantasy. Well, they just rebooted it, right? All their old miniatures were carried over.
We're calling it Warhammer Fantasy dying.
Yeah.
You want to call it a reboot. You want to call it the next edition. It doesn't matter. They made a significant change like they've never done before. 40K itself has never experienced this. They've gone through some pretty significant edition changes, and yet nothing akin to this.
I suspect if they didn't have the 40K property, they wouldn't have made AOS. I think they probably wouldn't have canceled it and took the risk of doing another product, but they had something else that was making all their money that they could rely on. This was a gamble for them.
Right.
So without 40K, they would have kept working on in fantasy, in my opinion, and tweaked it around a bunch.
And then maybe eventually got out of business because of it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Or maybe we're playing Warhammer Fantasy 9th edition or 10th edition right now.
Right.
But because they had their big cash cow, they had the ability to take their mold and make something else with it.
Now the funny thing is like 40K wasn't always that way. Warhammer Fantasy was their first game.
Yep.
It's what grew Games Workshop from nothing to something big. Warhammer 40K was later introduced, not that much later, and it was just basically a space version of fantasy.
Yeah.
Like you really look at it, and that's all it is.
It still is.
Necrons, it still is, right? And I love it. The Necrons are just Tomb Kings in space. You've got elves becoming Eldar, dwarves becoming squats,
Yep.
and then becoming dead. You have, they didn't have Space Marines in fantasy until Age of Sigmar, but you essentially had, and it was an empire, and you have the Imperium. Like you have like literally the same models from Chaos were transposable between the two universes. And they even hinted for a while that the Warhammer Fantasy universe was part of the Warhammer 40K
Yes.
universe.
Well,
that's gone now.
There was a time where that was actually canon, and then it wasn't. Then it was again.
Right, yeah, and just like any other long-running universe, there's going to be retcons and changes to make it align better with what they want to do in the future.
Sigmar originally was one of the Lost Primarchs, then he wasn't. And
Yeah, exactly. And they thought that was coming back with Age of Sigmar because you had the Stormcast Eternals, which look like Space Marines, but it just turns out that they just like the look of a Space Marine, so they're going to bring it to their
Space
fantasy
Marines
game,
sold. They found another way of selling Space Marines,
and they look awesome.
which is unfortunately a little sad because now we have two of the same game, only slightly different, but whatever.
Sure. So, let's go back.
Okay.
About 3 years ago now? 4 years ago? I don't remember.
I think about 4.
When Age of Sigmar was birthed, when the end times happened for Warhammer Fantasy, and then they launched Age of Sigmar. We're not going to discuss whether Age of Sigmar was a good game at first, because it wasn't.
It wasn't.
But the question is, why did they have to get rid of Warhammer Fantasy? So I have a few reasons. I want to hear your idea first, Steve. Give me one
there's something.
of the reasons that you think that they had to eventually reboot it, cancel it,
I
whatever.
think there are two main reasons, but there's a bunch of there's the whole thing that I'll explain to you. I'm not sure you're aware of. So the two main reasons I think are Warhammer Fantasy is so complicated that even right now, fantasy videos will go up or whatever. People will comment you're doing X wrong, and they're wrong. People think they don't play fantasy, but the rule book had. You had to check 3 different chapters for one thing. It was so convoluted. It was so poorly written and so thick with rules that people thought, even I thought, when I started doing bat reps, I thought I knew how to play Warhammer Fantasy. And all the comments are coming in and doing this wrong. I had to look at it. Oh, you're wrong. Oh, you're right. No, you're wrong. You're right. Back and forth. It was poorly written rules. Like the errata.
Was it poorly written,
Yes.
or was it
Yes.
complicated?
Both.
Because those are two different things.
Both. The errata for 8th edition was this thick.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
If you can't see his fingers, that's like a good 3/4 of an inch.
The errata was almost as
Or like
thick as
almost
the
2
rules
centimeters.
section in that big tome. Okay, the errata and explanations.
Similar to the errata for 40K 7th edition, where it was like we came up with 20 or 30 pages of FAQs.
That's funny. So back in Warhammer 40K 7th edition, I can't remember who did it, but somebody took all the rules you need, with the exception of the special abilities, and put it all in a 7-page pamphlet.
Right.
Everything for 7th edition Warhammer 40K. And that game was pretty. You could not do that with fantasy. There was too many rules. There's just too many.
Was it mainly that you found that to be in how things moved? Because everything was on
Most of the
movement trees?
errata in the FAQ was about the movement phase.
Right.
Or retreating, like movement in other phases.
Right.
But it's all about moving your stuff. There are even a couple of things to this day that aren't fully. We just kind of handle them a certain way about retreating in combat in certain angles. But yeah, so the rules were bad. They were bad. I mean, they were great once you
say they're
learn
bad,
them.
but you love that game.
No.
So
That's
clearly
what
the
I'm
rules
saying.
aren't bad.
The rules were great. The rules layout and learning, they had a steep learning curve. And then the amount of models you needed got out of control. Like, I painted more high elves since I started working for MiniWarGaming than beforehand, and like that used to be a massive army. Like you needed more and more. Like 20-man blobs weren't good enough anymore. You needed 40 or 50. You needed more war machines. You didn't bring monsters. Got left behind. Monsters were no longer usable. So all those really cool things that I'm talking from a power level. I'll point that out. Like you can use it if you want. But like those really cool centerpieces of your army, you weren't in your army because you couldn't really bring a character on a dragon. It's gonna get shot by a cannon and just dead. So it killed the really cool stuff. The army started looking, what's the word I'm looking for? Just, it was always the same. Here's my big horde and my support pieces. And if I have enough points, a couple of other, random things. So the armies stopped looking cool. Armies got bigger, but more of the same. The rules had steep looting curve and poorly written, and you could play like War Machine. You could play a dozen games against somebody you're never going to touch them in combat if he doesn't want you to. Like if you didn't learn all the nuances of movement, it took you a lot of trial and error. It was probably unfun for a lot of people at the beginning. I'm sure because I taught Cullen. Cullen probably didn't have fun at the beginning. Then it's hard to say because he loves the game now.
Right. Well, there's a lot of games with steep learning curves that are wonderful games, but I think your point though is good because if there's a steep learning curve, then you're kind of keeping out new players.
Yeah, you had a big financial investment to get in, and then you got to hope that you don't get annoyed and walk away from the game with your steep learning curve.
See, I think we have evidence that at least Games Workshop agrees with you. Not necessarily that they think their rules weren't good. I don't know if anybody would agree that it was poorly written because maybe they'll think no, we tried our hardest to write it as well as we could, but there's just a lot too moving with movement trays and stuff. But they can definitely, I would think they would definitely agree on a higher level that there was too many rules because what was one of the big selling points of Age of Sigmar? 4 pages of rules, right? Whether that was a good thing or not, it wasn't.
That's what they banked on.
That's what they pushed. They talked about it so much. There's only 4 pages of rules. You can play the entire game in only 4 pages of rules, which wasn't the case. That's what they said. And then they needed another 20 pages of errata. And then all the rules were really on the war scrolls now. Yeah. And now they no longer try to even tell you it's only 4 pages. Yeah. But that was their thing. So I think they agree there that they must because they really pushed the brand change from this thick book to a pamphlet of rules. Whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, it doesn't matter. It's the fact that they were willing to do that. So point number 1, yeah, I think that the rules were too complicated. We can talk about balance and stuff. Like I didn't like watching certain spells and stuff, but we come into Age of Sigmar, there's plenty of balance issues too.
See, I'm aware that you played against certain named characters a lot.
Techless.
Now, in Warhammer Fantasy, it was almost taboo to bring a named character. They were cool to buy and bring every now and then, but like you got your opponent's permission. That was actually a difficult thing for me when I moved to 40K. I'm like, people were always bringing these named characters. I'm like, ask my whatever, just go ahead and do it. I don't care.
Well, yeah, they're not as good in 40K compared to Fantasy.
In 40K, it was like I didn't realize it was just so accepted, whereas Fantasy was completely different. Like they were powerful, right? Which could really.
Yeah, I'm trying to stay out of how much I like the game because I enjoyed the game, but I had bought a Tomb King's army. And turns out that's a hard army to master in the older editions and the newer editions. And then it turned out that the local meta, the people that would come in and play me, a lot of it was high elves that had really good magic, and a lot of that magic killed you, like the Purple Sun, for example.
Purple Sun's going to kill
Tomb Kings. It's like initiative test or you die. Well, Tomb Kings are initiative 2 across the board. I'm like, cool, look at all these cool new chariots I finally have. They're all dead. Okay, that wasn't fun. And the Tomb Kings need magic just to do what everybody else does normally. Oh, but I'm high elf, so I'm just going to dispel all your magic. And so you're just like. So my experience there. So I want to divorce myself from that because I know that if I had played a more competitive army, I could have had a different experience. I'm more looking at objectively why fantasy was removed, and I think that point number 1 too complicated.
This is the third point, which I think adds on to that.
So hold on. The first point was too complicated.
Yep.
Second point was you needed too many models.
Yes.
And point 2B is that when you added more models. It unfortunately was just more of the same.
It was more the same.
It's not like you developed your army to have all sorts.
I didn't buy new units. I bought more of the ones I already have.
Exactly, and that it's not just the problem of more models because we'll talk about what Age of Sigmar needs to worry about and 40K needs to worry about that we witnessed with Warhammer Fantasy.
Now,
and so that kind of will tie into that.
The third one was this one I have trouble. I can't stand behind this as much as the other two, but what I saw and my understanding was. The fantasy players were far more competitive than the 40K ones. They were all about tournament comp, tournament lists. This is how you make your list. You just what you don't bring. You don't use the rules or the rule book where it's just 2,000 points and whatever. Like you have to bring only so many war machines or whatever. That was now again. I can't say that completely. I can't say that was everywhere, but I know that was a big thing in fantasy. It was far more competitive, more War Machine-esque than 40K was.
That adds another gatekeeping thing, right? Yeah. Gatekeeping being keeping new players out. Is that now you have a hard game, and if people are used to playing it competitively, that's an even steeper learning curve, which can discourage you from wanting to really get into the game.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I think going back to the point of that, even though you had bigger armies, it didn't look any better because it's just more of the same. The game didn't really play well terrain. And I would add this as point number 4, because you talked about tournament players for 3. My point number 4 would be that the game was too terrain light.
Yes.
And
well, all games were back then.
Yeah, even 40K. People would get mad at me all the time for setting up too much terrain. Now I don't hear that complaint anymore because they enjoy the nice, dense, cool-looking tables. But fantasy, you've put more than a couple little things on the table, and all of a sudden it wasn't just like a stop complaining and play the game anyways. It really did make the game almost impossible. You couldn't fit unless you then reposition all your guys, and that. Oh, now I got to take them out of the movement trays.
One rock right here at the table, like you see where my hand is, right there. You can totally dictate the game with that rock.
Right.
You have to keep the center pretty clear.
Yeah, exactly. And so that keeps the games from looking cool. I think it's the same problem that War Machine has had and currently has, is that War Machine players don't want terrain because the rules of the game don't play friendly with terrain. And
that's a good thing.
People out there might be like, oh, you're wrong, War Machine plays fine with terrain. And I agree. I played plenty of War Machine games with terrain. But if you're trying to keep it as balanced and competitive as possible, the terrain did throw off that balance. And Warhammer Fantasy, I think a cool-looking table would be something that has like city pieces on it. And yes, it is totally playable, but it can throw off the balance of what you do so much that it can be incredibly frustrating. And that's the problem right there.
Well, it almost worked more. We did some city battles on some city mats, but we couldn't play with hordes.
Well, you just had to choose not to, right?
Yeah.
But that's fun, though.
See, it was absolutely fun.
So that's like point number 4, question mark. Because you could play with terrain, but the game kind of tended towards having you not want to play with terrain.
I'm gonna sort of kind of argue that point a little bit because I suspect there are games out there that are so terrain heavy it keeps people away.
Maybe.
But again, I can't.
Maybe.
That terrain light thing might be a boon for some people. No, I don't gotta buy terrain.
Yes.
But
if you want to play Infinity, you have to spend more money on terrain than you do on models. You need only 10 models, but you need a table's worth of terrain. But in the end, everybody has books and cups and stuff they could pull off.
But like everybody can have a fancy fancy table in their basement. You have a table and you make 2 rocks for hills and a tree.
And you're done.
You have to do anything else.
And a watchtower for that one scenario you never play.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I still think that I would put that on the list of disadvantages. I would say point number 5, and this might go back into point number 1. It would be like a point 1B because you're talking about the complication of the rules. Would be movement trays and square bases.
I love those.
Yes. And why do you love them?
Okay.
Just simply, what's the simple answer? Why do you love movement trays?
I like the idea of regimental warfare, people marching, whatever. But the movement trays, I was able to move them easier.
Right.
But then
you can move them faster.
But then those 50 models were just one model.
Right. And so that I remember watching when I played 40K and Fantasy, and even afterwards, you put 50 models in the movement, or 25 models in the movement tray. It takes up this much space. You take those same 25 models and play them in 40K. They take up this much space, which looks so much better. Second to that is that once again,
I don't know if I agree with that one, but that was debatable. Like to you, it looked better, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, you have to spend all this time and money just to make something this big.
I know, but see, even in AOS, for the longest time at the beginning, when I played my elves were still on square bases, I would march them on the movement tray. It looked really cool. And then they would charge and scatter.
Right.
But that was cool to me. What was cool to me is not what cool.
That's
somebody
true.
may have been super.
You still left the movement tray.
Well, you have to be able to get your attacks in, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? You realize that's going to negate your effectiveness. But I still think, and once again, arguable, but not really, square bases don't look as nice as circular bases.
On their own. You're right. Round bases look better on their own.
And some people, that's more subjective, so that point could be stricken from our list of reasons. But in the end, it can be subjective. But if the majority of people agree, then that is I don't think that they canceled Warhammer Fantasy because they're on square bases. I think that is a contributing factor to it because not that they're on square bases, but the fact that they're in movement trays. Because that, to me, ruined the aesthetic of the game. And if Games Workshop has really shown one thing that they're about, is that they're more about aesthetic than they are about the game. They are definitely about the game, but in the past, they've literally said that they care more about the hobby than the game.
Yes.
Now, I think that they wouldn't say that because they've worked so hard to try to be on track with the game. You can say that whether they've done a good job or not doesn't matter. You have to say they've worked hard on it. And so that, looking back at that, it's like whenever I looked at their battle reports in the White Dwarf, they had terrain. There was a cool looking Garden of Moor and some city terrain. And you'd look at that and be like, oh man, they're going to have a hard time playing that. And yet that's what they would show off. And yet that's not what people
Those
would
are
want to do.
really cool. Those are really cool.
Yeah, and then it looked cool with those regiments. And they taught you they had their terrain making book that they taught you how to take like a welcome mat and like have that be your grass field. And then literally how to cut it into the movement tray and into the movement tray sizes, so that when a tray wanted to go in, you could remove a spot and have it move into it. And when it moved to the next one, you'd swap it around so they could move through a wheat field. That's what the game needed. You needed to make your terrain so that you could move through a wheat field. And so whereas now it's just like whatever, just throw your train over there and then move your models through it, like literally drop your guys on top of it. Who cares? So I think that was probably one of the big things too. But if I had to put it down and say that you can only make 2 points, what are the 2 reasons you think that Warhammer Fantasy was canceled? I have to say the rules, which encapsulates movement trays, complexity, square bases, and the second one would be, oh no, you know what? We didn't even mention the one that I think is the biggest reason.
Which is?
The generic nature of their lore. And the fact that as much,
no way. You got to dig a little deeper, sir.
I know some people are really mad at me right now because they're like, no, if you read all the books, you know how much lore there is. And I get that. You can take any generic looking fantasy, and if you just write enough books, you've made your own universe and how it's different. But to an outsider looking in, they just see regular dwarves that match the Tolkien dwarves, and regular elves that match Tolkien elves, and regular orcs and goblins.
Well, for me, I played fantasy before I read Lord of the Rings, so they copied fantasy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because that's how it worked. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what anybody, what you. If you're into the lore, you are an exception. Most people don't get into it, so they look up and they see we're literally in Middle Earth. Or just in England, because it was even modeled. The whole old world was modeled after Europe.
Dark Elf split, the Goblin Dwarf Wars, the Bretonnian Empire relationship, the Elf Bretonnian relationship, the High Elf Empire relationship, the Border Prince. Stop! It was so good.
Yes, but in the end, the Bretonnians were They were just a bunch of Grail Knights.
That's fair.
From the Dark Ages.
That's fair.
And everything looked like stuff from England.
Well, okay, but
and then you had the only thing that was really unique was Chaos. Even those just look like
product
demons
of the
from
time.
Typical.
Because even everything Warhammer 40K is a joke or a reference to something else.
Right.
Like everything, the Two Missing Legions, everything is a joke or a reference to something else. They've just expanded upon it.
Right.
So I'm not going to let you judge their lore when they didn't have a chance to get expanded upon.
And yet,
or nobody cared enough to expand upon.
They agree with me. Do you know how I know Games Workshop agrees with me?
You talked to him and you asked?
No.
Oh.
Because dwarves are Duradin.
Yes. Well, no.
And
Okay,
elves
I think
elves.
No. That one I think we can comfortably say that's a trademark thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
Oh, okay.
It went from generic lore to something more trademarkable.
So then they can copyright.
If you notice how they haven't come out with more elves, they've come out with Idoneth Deepkin.
Well, but
Have they come out with elves?
Daughters of Cain, the snake elves.
Yeah, they're snake elves. They're not elves. They're snake elves. Have they come out with just dwarves? Nope.
Yeah, Garrett aren't overlords. They're just dwarves.
No, they're different than your typical Tolkien dwarves. Tolkien dwarves were...
Oh, they're sky dwarves, they're underground dwarves?
Exactly. And that might be a little closer, but still it's a significant difference.
Yeah.
Fire Slayers, it's
which is cool. This is them expanding upon their lore.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a reason that they had, the very first faction that came out was Stormcast Eternals.
Now,
there's
there's some stuff you maybe you know all this. I don't know. I'm gonna let you know a little more about the end of fantasy and what was going. No. The stuff that's going on with the company. So we back then you knew rumors. You knew what things were going on long before. Mm-hmm. So well before we knew about the end times, we knew about these new models that we all assumed was for the Empire. These
that look like Space Marines.
Well, no, that they never said that. They were heavily armored priests.
Right.
Sigmar's priests. Oh, not Sigmar. Karl Franz, who became Sigmar. But we heard about those models long before we knew about End Times. Okay, End Times comes out, wraps up all the storylines, kills everybody off. New kits come out that are all AOS scale. Everything's a little bit bigger. New kits come out. So, and looking back in hindsight, we kind of knew they were going to do it. While they're working on End Times, giving it their last hurrah, and the models are ready for the next game. But what else is, I don't know how important this is, but if you go back and look in the supplements that came out well before End Times, you see the AOS terrain they're in pictures in the background of these books. not the models, just the terrain and the backgrounds for the making the nice setups, whatever. They had this AOS terrain years before AOS came out. So, how long of a play was it?
Probably a long one. A company of Games Workshop size does not make those kind of changes that quickly,
Right.
or rashly. Like the typical, like
Because-
for larger releases, those releases are worked on for 3 to 4 years. They've been discussed for that long. All the work is usually in the past year or two before it goes out, but there's decisions made 3 to 4 years in advance.
So-
When somebody made a decision to cancel Fantasy and make Age of Sigmar or reboot, whatever you want to call
It
it,
takes time, obviously.
they probably made that. My
Now-
guess is at least 4 years before it actually happened.
Okay, now, so if anyone wants, I don't have the books with me. If you want to send me an email, I'll actually send you pictures of the terrain in the background from the books we have upstairs. Now, sales were on the increase during end times. If they had taken all that, all
Were
the
they?
work, yeah.
I don't remember.
If
I
you,
can't
if,
speak
you,
to
if you
that.
take all the work they put in the end times and used it to reboot and refresh Fantasy, like they kind of did, because that's kind of what I suspect also added to the bad taste. Here's your, look at all this amazing stuff you're getting. By the way, now it's over.
Yeah, and all those
Like,
things
they
you
would've
just bought are no longer valid rules.
Well, now, which is in hindsight, I'm glad they gave Fantasy their last hurrah. It was thank you Games Workshop for doing that. Like if you just ended it, it'd been probably worse for me. But like I see the conclusion of their story now. I'm happy, but I suspect you could have kept it going with the work because Fantasy didn't seem to get the work and the lore and the supplements that 40K did.
Right.
But that's my perception. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, then we have an interesting thing that happened after Fantasy was rebooted to Age of Sigmar, and that is Total War Warhammer.
Yeah.
And that's done very well for the Total War series. It's actually a very popular one. It's not just, there's been a lot of Warhammer games that have come out, and some have done poorly, and some have done well.
Yep.
I'd put Total War Warhammer as one of their top ones in how well it's done. But that's all Warhammer Fantasy. The lore,
It's all the whole world,
visuals. Now, it works perfectly for Total War, because Total War is regimental warfare.
Yeah.
But you don't have to worry. You can have terrain in that one, because the computer takes care of all the annoying movement. You just click a guy and tell him where to go, and it's like it'll reform over a hill and through brush and through a thick forest and stuff. And so it's like Warhammer Fantasy is the way it was meant to be played, but you couldn't because moving them on a movement tray basically restricted you from doing a lot of the cool stuff it could be shown to do.
I have a question for you older people. Like people who've been playing, say, Warhammer 40K for years, who've been around playing this hobby when Warhammer Fantasy was out, and you didn't play Warhammer Fantasy, but now play AOS. What kept you away from Fantasy, but you're now playing AOS? I know you exist.
Age of Sigmar, you mean?
Sorry, yes. What kept you away from Warhammer Fantasy battles, and you were playing back then, but you now play Age of Sigmar?
That's a good
I
question.
want to know.
We like those comments. And actually, it goes for anybody of any age. Were you enticed by Age of Sigmar, and whereas before you weren't by Warhammer Fantasy? And I also like to hear from, obviously, the people that do exist, that saw the title of this video and are jumped on and probably already left lots of nasty comments.
I'm with you, Fantasy guys. I love it too, but
What-
AOS is fun too.
What annoyed you the most about that reboot? Was it just that they basically abandoned all the money you spent and time that you spent? Or do you actually have a deeper love for the game that you can honestly say is because of the game and the lore, and not just because you're ticked off that your models are no longer really valid and that you got to rebase everything?
I have a theory on that one. I suspect when Age of Sigmar came out, if it was just a new box set, and the rules came out just for the Sigmarites and the Khorne guys right away, and they didn't have all the fantasy rules in it, all the fantasy models, people would have been less upset. It was like, oh, you killed my game for this new game. It was just a new game, and then a couple months later, it said, oh, if you want to use your old fantasy models, here's some rules for them too if you wanted to.
Right.
I think it was that initial moment of, oh, you just killed everything,
Right.
where it didn't have to be that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
But
that's
they
the
have,
theory.
if we really look at it honestly, for the most part, they did kind of destroy most of the old armies. Sure, you can still play Bretonians.
Well, they literally
Sure, you can still play with your free people, and they're fun to play with.
they killed a lot of people in end times.
Yeah, but I mean you can play with your Tomb Kings and with your High Elves and with your Dark Elves, but in the end, they're not going to stand up to the Deepkin and the Gloomspike Gits and the Stormcast Eternals and the Blades of Khorne and the Heat Knights of Slaanesh.
Right now, right? Like they found a way, like the Daughters of Cain, right? They added new models to the line and
Yeah, and
revamped
Gloomspike
them.
uses all the old Night Goblins.
Revamp
So
them,
they
new
have it,
models.
and Iron Jaws uses something that was a unit.
Black Orcs, yeah.
Was the Black Orcs, and now it's an entire army. So it's not like they're all gone. And like I said, they've never said that Warhammer Fantasy was dead. They brought a lot of stuff in.
Well, no, they did because they killed it. Not the game. They actually killed the universe.
Yes, but there's still a lot of those things that survived, like
Yeah.
the Seraphim, for example. And even though they're all kind of conjured up as memories,
Yeah.
it's still all there. But if we face the facts as a player, that doesn't make a Tomb Kings player feel better or a Bretonnian player feel better to know that they're thinking about it. It's like they want real competitive rules and more support for their models. And I don't think that's going to happen for Tomb Kings of Bretonnia. I think Bretonnia will come back. Tomb Kings will come back.
Could you imagine what Bretonnia would look like nowadays? Like if they, what could they,
Right.
What they
But
could
they're
do
not
with
going
them?
to be. They're not going to be Grail Knights, and the Tomb Kings won't be Egyptian.
Right.
They're going to have to update their aesthetic so that it's something that they can trademark and so something that is their own. And I think that's an important thing for them to do. They just walk away from that. We're just basically D&D in large scale, or Tolkien universe in large scale. Try to make it their own, especially with all of now there's a lot of other companies that can make good-looking miniatures. Third parties who will support 40K and Fantasy and Age of Sigmar by giving you more models for it and other parts and bits. They need to be able to protect their IP a lot more by doing this, and just keep it fresh as well.
So the fantasy players who are watching this video right now that don't play AOS are here just to complain, because we always get that. I think you're doing yourself a disservice by comparing the two or focusing on the hurt emotions of the time. It's a separate thing. It's a different thing. It's the same thing.
I would be mad if I
Well,
personally,
enough time has passed. Like
Yeah.
look, judge this game for itself now.
Yeah.
It's a very different thing.
Yeah,
than when it
move
first
beyond what you. I
It's
understand
it's time to move
I know
on.
why people got upset.
Yes.
Regardless of whether it was a good position or a good move for the business of Games Workshop, it doesn't mean that every consumer benefited from it.
I don't think anybody can argue it wasn't a good mood for them.
No, it was obviously it sells way better than Fantasy did, and we have documentable proof about that. But the fact of the matter is, if I am an individual and I spent $2,000 and several hundred hours of my time, and then that army is now no longer in the game, I would be upset. I don't care how good the new game is. I don't care how bad the old
That's
game
kind of
was.
the point I'm just trying to make. That army is still in the game. That's the different game. It's a different game.
But it's not, because Tomb Kings haven't gotten a rules update for 4 years. They're not competitive. If you play.
Okay, yeah. If you're Tomb Kings or Bretonnians, okay, you can do something.
And there's a lot of other ones like that too, but they're just not really fun to play anymore, because unless you're playing against other low tier armies, you're always going to lose and you're not going to have fun. So, anyways, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Be kind to both us and Games Workshop, because they're working hard to make a great game, and they're also, let's face it, in it to make money. And so they've got to make the right decisions for their shareholders, for their thousands of employees.
They have to make money, or we don't have a game.
Exactly. And so they have to make those decisions. I'm sure that if they had a choice, they would have loved to keep Warhammer Fantasy, especially if probably they knew Total War Warhammer was going to be a thing, even as they canceled it.
Hey, maybe one day, movement trays will come up for this game.
Yeah. That'll never happen for 40K. No, we'll never see movement trays. Like Apocalypse. Anyways.
Soon in Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, I've seen Age of Sigmar. But they won't be square, and you can...
No, but you can put them in line. They're going to march, and
Yeah,
they'll have grand games. And
then they jump out.
no, they'll leave them in there.
I see.
They'll be actually, yeah.
Yeah, and they have to remove the train from the table so it works.
I can hope.
Thank you so much for watching. Let us know your opinions in the comments below, and happy wargaming.